The March rain hammered against the windows of Zara's apartment as Minjun's trembling hands gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. 6 months ago, those same hands had signed billion-dollar contracts from the 47th floor of Park Industries in Gangnam. Now, calloused from construction work and stained with paint from weekend renovations, they shook as he stared at the formal invitation lying on the marble surface. The Washington family cordially invites Park Min-jun to Sunday lunch. 2 p.m. sharp. Come prepared to answer questions. Marcus had delivered it personally that morning, his jaw set in that protective stance Min-jun had learned to recognize. No handshake, no pleasantries. Just the invitation dropped on the counter like a legal summons. "My family wants to meet you," Zara had whispered when she came home soaked from the downpour, her natural curls clinging to her face, honey-colored eyes red from what looked like hours of crying. "They know you came after me." Minjun's heart had stopped completely. 6 months of learning to say, baby, instead of yobo, of trading Korean honorifics for firm handshakes, of folding his pride smaller and smaller until it fit into this modest Decatur apartment. All of it had led to this moment. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his father. "Last chance, Minjun. The board meeting is tomorrow. Sign the papers and come home, or you're dead to this family." Minjun deleted it without reading past the first line. For 32 years, he had lived for duty, for family honor, for the weight of expectations that came with being a Park. But standing in this small kitchen, watching Zara's shoulders shake as she tried to compose herself, he knew he would rather be dead to his blood family than lose the woman who had taught him what real love felt like. "What did Marcus say exactly?" Minjun asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Zara turned, and the pain in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. "He said if I bring another man home who's going to break my heart, he'll personally make sure it's the last time." She took a shuddering breath. And then Mom said something I've never heard her say before. "What?" "She said she lost her first love because she let family pressure win. She won't let me make the same mistake." Zara's voice cracked. "But she also won't watch me get hurt again." The weight of generations pressed down on Minjun's shoulders. Mrs. Dorothy Washington, the family matriarch who had raised 2 children after her husband's death, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to send Marcus to college and Zara to architecture school, her approval wasn't just a formality, it was everything. "And if they say no?" Minjun asked, though he dreaded the answer. Zara's silence stretched between them like a chasm. When she finally spoke, her words shattered something deep in his chest. "Then you'll have your answer about whether this was all worth it." The red umbrella he had carried from Seoul leaned against the wall, forgotten. Tomorrow, it would either shelter their future together, or become a relic of the love that almost was. If the contract of your life came from those who could destroy your happiness, would you sign it? Sunday morning arrived gray and unforgiving. Minjun stood before the bathroom mirror, attempting his 5th tie of the morning. In Seoul, his stylist would have had him ready in minutes. Perfectly pressed Armani, Italian leather shoes, the armor of inherited wealth. Now, wearing the only suit he'd brought from Korea, he looked like a man trying too hard to be someone he used to be. "You're going to strangle yourself," Zara said from the doorway, her voice gentle but strained. She wore a terracotta dress that brought out the gold in her eyes, her hair styled in the natural curls she'd stopped straightening since he'd told her how beautiful they were. "In Korea, we have a saying," Minjun said, finally managing a decent knot. "Chiot nune banheya handa." You must win them over at first sight. "Baby, you're not trying to close a business deal. Zara stepped behind him, her hands smoothing the shoulders of his jacket. "You're asking my family to trust you with their most precious thing. Their most precious thing." The weight of those words settled over him like a lead blanket. In his world, daughters were assets to be strategically married. In hers, they were hearts to be protected. The drive to Mrs. Washington's house in East Atlanta felt like a funeral procession. Zara's hand trembled in his as they passed the Baptist church, where she'd sung in the choir as a child, the community center where Marcus had coached basketball, the fabric store where her grandmother had taught 3 generations of women to sew. This wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a legacy. "That's it," Zara said quietly, as they pulled up to a modest brick house with a wraparound porch and a garden that looked like something from a magazine. Wind chimes sang in the breeze, and the smell of something incredible drifted from the open windows. Before Minjun could gather his courage, the front door opened. Marcus filled the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing a simple t-shirt that somehow looked more intimidating than any power suit Minjun had ever faced across a boardroom table. "You came," Marcus said. It wasn't quite a welcome. "I always keep my word," Minjun replied, offering a slight bow that felt absurd the moment he did it. Marcus's eyebrows rose. "We'll see about that." The house smelled like heaven and felt like walking into a warm hug. Minjun had never experienced anything like it. Not the sterile perfection of his family's mansion, not the cold elegance of corporate entertaining. This was a home where love lived in every corner. "You must be Minjun." Mrs. Dorothy Washington emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a flowered apron. At 58, she carried herself with the grace of someone who had earned every gray hair and every laugh line. Her eyes, the same honey color as Zara's, studied him with the intensity of someone who had spent decades reading people's hearts. "Mrs. Washington." Minjun bowed slightly, then caught himself and extended his hand instead. "Thank you for welcoming me into your home." Her handshake was firm, measuring. "We'll see if you're worth welcoming." God, they really don't hold back, Minjun thought. The dining room table was set for 5. Marcus's wife Keisha had joined them, along with little Destiny, Marcus's 4-year-old daughter who stared at Minjun with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Mama Zara's boyfriend talks funny," Destiny announced, and the tension cracked just enough for everyone to breathe. "Destiny Marie," Keisha scolded gently, but she was fighting a smile. "It's okay," Minjun said, crouching to Destiny's level. "I'm still learning how to talk like an American. Can you teach me?" "Say y'all," Destiny commanded seriously. "Y'all," Minjun repeated, his Korean accent wrapping around the word awkwardly. "No, no, no. Y'all." Destiny stretched it out dramatically. "Y'all." Minjun tried again, and Destiny giggled. "Better. You're getting there." When Minjun looked up, Mrs. Washington was watching him with something that might have been approval. Might. The meal was a revelation. Fried chicken that put every restaurant he'd ever been to. Shame, mac and cheese that somehow managed to be both comfort food and art. Greens that tasted like they'd been kissed by angels. Minjun, who had eaten in Michelin-starred restaurants across 3 continents, had never tasted anything this perfect. "This is incredible," he said, and meant it. "Family recipes," Mrs. Washington said, but there was warmth in her voice now. "Passed down from my grandmother." "I've been trying to learn to cook," Minjun said. "Zara's been teaching me, but I'm afraid I'm not very good at it yet." "What's your specialty back home?" Marcus asked. and Minjun caught the trap in the question. Ordering takeout? Minjun admitted, and to his surprise, Marcus cracked a smile. Honest. I like that. The conversation flowed easier after that, but Minjun could feel the real questions lurking beneath the surface. When Mrs. Washington excused herself to get dessert, Marcus leaned forward, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. So, let me ask you something, Minjun. Marcus's voice was steel wrapped in silk. My sister's been hurt before, real bad. So bad that she stopped believing good men existed. His eyes locked onto Minjun's. You came all the way from Korea, gave up your fancy job, learned to live like regular folks. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard, or the most elaborate con. The room went silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Which one is it? Minjun set down his fork carefully, buying himself a few seconds to find the right words. In boardrooms, he'd learned to control information, to reveal only what served his purpose. But looking at Marcus's protective fury, at Zara's barely contained anxiety, at Mrs. Washington returning from the kitchen with pound cake that smelled like childhood itself, he realized that his corporate tactics would destroy everything he'd come here to build. You want the truth? Minjun said finally. I was engaged to someone else when I met Zara. The collective intake of breath around the table was audible. Zara's eyes went wide. He'd never told her about So Young. Her name was Kim So Young, daughter of another Chaebol family. Perfect match on paper. Same social class, same education, same expectations about duty over love. Minjun's hands clenched in his lap. Our fathers arranged it when we were teenagers. 20 years of planning for a marriage that would merge two companies. And? Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. And then I met your sister at a conference in Los Angeles last year. Minjun looked directly at Zara, watching her face transform as she realized the depth of what he'd sacrificed. She was presenting a sustainable housing project, and she was brilliant. Not just smart, brilliant. She talked about building homes that would last generations, about creating communities instead of just structures. He took a shaky breath. I'd never heard anyone talk about their work the way she did. Like it mattered. Like it could change the world. So you broke up with your fiancé? Keisha asked. I tried to honor my commitment. Went back to Korea. Threw myself into the merger plans. But I couldn't stop thinking about Zara. About the way she laughed when she was really happy. About how she cried during movies. Even bad ones. About how she looked at buildings like she could see their souls. Mrs. Washington sat down slowly, cake forgotten. And then, I called off the engagement 3 months ago, right before the wedding, in front of 300 guests, both families, and the national media. Minjun's voice cracked slightly. My father disowned me that night. Said I was dead to the family. My mother hasn't spoken to me since. The silence stretched until destiny broke it. Uncle Minjun, why are you sad? Out of the mouths of babes. Minjun wiped his eyes, not realizing he'd started crying. Because sometimes doing the right thing costs everything you thought you knew about yourself, he said. But you came here anyway. Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I came here because I realized something. I'd spent 32 years living someone else's life, following someone else's plan, being the son they wanted instead of the man I am. Minjun looked around the table. Zara was the first person who ever saw me, not Park Industries, not the heir to a fortune. Just me. And when you realized that, Mrs. Washington said softly, you decided to fight for it. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Washington studied him for a long moment, then turned to her daughter. Zara, baby, you've been awfully quiet. Zara had tears streaming down her face. I didn't know, she whispered, about the wedding, about your family. You never told me how much you gave up. Because it wasn't a sacrifice, Minjun said fiercely. It was the first free choice I ever made. Marcus leaned back in his chair, something shifting in his expression. You know what I think? I think you're either the biggest fool I've ever met, or the most romantic man alive. Probably both, Minjun admitted. Good. Because my sister deserves someone who's fool enough to cross oceans and romantic enough to believe it's worth it. Marcus extended his hand across the table. Welcome to the family. But before Minjun could shake it, Mrs. Washington held up her hand. Hold on now, she said. I've got one more question. The room tensed again. What exactly are your intentions with my daughter? Minjun stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Then, to everyone's shock, he dropped to one knee right there in the dining room. Mrs. Washington, I came here to ask for your blessing to marry Zara. I don't have a ring yet because I wanted your permission first. I don't have much money because I left it all behind. But I have something I never had before. I have a reason to wake up every morning and try to be worthy of the love she's given me. Zara was sobbing now, her hands covering her mouth. I promise you, Minjun continued, his voice breaking. I will spend every day of my life proving that your daughter chose the right man. I will learn your traditions, honor your family, and love her so completely that she never doubts her worth again. Mrs. Washington stood up slowly, walked around the table, and for a heart-stopping moment, Minjun thought she was going to ask him to leave. Instead, she cupped his face in her hands. Baby boy, she said, her own eyes bright with tears. You already have my blessing. Anyone who loves my daughter enough to give up a kingdom for her doesn't need my permission. They have my gratitude. As Minjun rose to his feet, Mrs. Washington pulled something from her apron pocket. A simple gold band with a small diamond that had clearly been worn by generations of women. This was my mother's ring, she said, pressing it into his palm. And her mother's before that. It's been waiting for the right man to give it to the right woman. Minjun's hands shook as he turned to Zara, who was laughing and crying at the same time. Zara Washington, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Will you marry me? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. As the family erupted in cheers and Destiny demanded to know why everyone was crying if they were happy, Minjun slipped the ring onto Zara's finger and realized that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. But love stories, even the most beautiful ones, are never that simple. And neither Marcus nor Minjun noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the woman with perfectly straightened hair and a designer handbag who had been watching through tinted windows, taking photos of every moment. Some ghosts from the past don't stay buried, no matter how deep you think you've laid them to rest. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Minjun was sleeping deeply for the first time in weeks. Zara curled against his side, her engagement ring catching the streetlight from the window. The shrill ring of her phone shattered the peace like a gunshot. Hello? Zara's voice was thick with sleep, but Minjun felt her body go rigid immediately. What? When? We're on our way. She was out of bed and throwing on clothes before Min-jun could fully wake up. "Zara, what's wrong?" "It's Mom." Marcus found her collapsed in the kitchen. "They think it's her heart." The drive to Grady Hospital was a blur of red lights and fear. Zara's hands shook so violently she couldn't buckle her seatbelt, so Min-jun did it for her, then took her hands in his and held them steady. "She's going to be okay," he said, though his own heart was hammering. "You don't know that," Zara whispered. "She's been working too hard, stressing about the wedding, worrying about us. What if—" "Hey." Min-jun squeezed her hands. "No what ifs. We're going to get there, and she's going to be fine." But when they arrived at the ICU, Marcus looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in one night. Keisha sat beside him, holding a sleeping Destiny, her eyes red from crying. "They say she had a massive heart attack," Marcus said without preamble. "She's stable for now, but the next 72 hours are critical." Through the window of room 314, Mrs. Washington looked impossibly small against the white hospital sheets, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. The woman who had raised 2 children with an iron will and a heart of gold looked fragile as tissue paper. "Can we see her?" Zara asked. "2 at a time," the nurse said. "And only family." Marcus and Zara went in first, leaving Min-jun in the waiting room with Keisha and Destiny. He felt useless, an outsider looking in on a family crisis he had no right to be part of. In Korea, hierarchies were clear. In-laws had their place, and it wasn't at the bedside during emergencies. But this wasn't Korea. "You should go in next," Keisha said quietly. "I'm not family," Min-jun replied. "You are to her." Keisha's voice was gentle but firm. "She's been talking about you non-stop since Sunday. About how proud she is that Zara found someone who loves her enough to change his whole life." When it was his turn, Min-jun approached Mrs. Washington's bedside with the reverence he'd once reserved for his grandmother's ancestral shrine. She looked so small, so vulnerable. In his world, respect was shown through distance, through formal bows and careful words. But looking at the woman who had welcomed him into her family with open arms, distance felt like betrayal. He took her hand, the same hand that had pressed her mother's ring into his palm just days ago. "Mrs. Washington," he said softly, "I need you to know something. You asked me what my intentions were with Zara, and I told you I wanted to marry her. But there's something else." He paused, gathering courage he didn't know he possessed. "I want you to be my mother, not because I lost mine when I left Korea, but because you're the kind of mother I always dreamed of having. Someone who loves without conditions, who fights for her children, who makes a house feel like home just by being in it." Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. "Min-jun," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here. We're all here. Take care of them," she said, her grip surprisingly strong. "Promise me. You're going to take care of them yourself for many more years," Min-jun said firmly. "But yes, I promise. I'll protect this family with my life." She smiled, a ghost of her usual radiant expression. "Good boy." The next 72 hours blurred together in a haze of hospital coffee, uncomfortable waiting room chairs, and the constant beeping of machines. Min-jun barely left the hospital, surviving on vending machine food and 3 hours of sleep spread over 2 days. He learned that Marcus took his coffee black and strong, that Keisha hummed when she was nervous, that Destiny asked exactly 100 questions per hour and would accept no question left unanswered. He also learned that Grace Chen was more than just Zara's best friend. She was the sister Zara had chosen, showing up with real food, clean clothes, and the kind of practical support that spoke to deep, abiding love. "You look like hell," Grace told him on the second night, appearing with Chinese takeout and a change of clothes for everyone. "Feel worse," Minjun admitted. "When's the last time you went home?" "I'm not leaving." Grace studied him for a moment. "You know, when Zara first told me about you, I thought you were either a fairy tale or a disaster waiting to happen. Rich foreign guy, too good to be true. Probably using her for some kind of green card situation. And now? Now I see a man who's been sleeping in a hospital chair for 3 days because he loves her family like his own." Grace handed him a container of lo mein. "Eat. Your fiancé needs you strong, not collapsing from exhaustion." It was Grace who was there at 2 a.m. on the third night, when Mrs. Washington took a turn for the worse. Alarms started blaring, and suddenly the room was full of doctors and nurses shouting medical terms that sounded like a foreign language. "What's happening?" Zara cried as they were pushed back into the hallway. "Complications," was all the doctor would say. "We need to take her into surgery." The wait was agony. Marcus paced like a caged tiger. Zara sat in stunned silence, staring at her hands. Keisha called the prayer chain at church, and within an hour, the waiting room was full of people Minjun had never met, but who clearly loved Mrs. Washington like family. Pastor Williams arrived at dawn, a man in his 70s with kind eyes and a voice that could calm storms. He led them in prayer, and Minjun found himself bowing his head and asking whatever gods were listening to spare the woman who had taught him what unconditional love looked like. "Lord, we come before you with heavy hearts," Pastor Williams began, and Minjun felt the collective strength of the community surrounding them. "We ask for your healing touch on Sister Dorothy, for your peace to fill this family, and for your will to be done." When the surgeon finally emerged, his scrubs wrinkled and his face exhausted, Minjun's heart stopped. "The surgery went well," he said, and the waiting room exhaled as one. "We were able to clear the blockage and repair the damage. She's stable, and we expect a full recovery." Marcus broke down sobbing. Zara collapsed into Minjun's arms, and Minjun realized that somewhere in the last 3 days, something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't Zara's family anymore. This was his family too. But as they celebrated Mrs. Washington's recovery, none of them noticed the woman in designer clothes who had been sitting in the far corner of the waiting room for the past hour, taking notes and making phone calls in rapid Korean. Kim So-young had arrived in Atlanta, and she had no intention of leaving without what she came for. Marcus showed up at Minjun's apartment on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after his mother's surgery, carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression that could have cut glass. Zara was at the farmer's market with Grace, planning the wedding they'd decided to move up after Mrs. Washington's heart attack. Life was too short and too fragile to wait for perfect timing. "We need to talk," Marcus said without preamble. Minjun invited him in, offered coffee, made small talk about Mrs. Washington's recovery. But he could feel the tension rolling off Marcus in waves. And when his soon-to-be brother-in-law finally sat down at the kitchen table and opened that folder, Minjun's blood turned to ice. Korean newspaper clippings, financial documents, photos of a wedding that never happened. And there, in black and white, the truth he'd been running from for 6 months. Park Minjun, Marcus read from a document. Heir to Park Industries, estimated net worth $2.3 billion. Renounced inheritance in public ceremony, March 15, 2024, 3 days before scheduled marriage to Kim So-young. daughter of Kim Electronics chairman. Minjun's hands went numb. Marcus, let me finish. Marcus's voice was deadly calm. Says here you were groomed from birth to take over a conglomerate that employs 50,000 people across 15 countries. Says you walked away from more money than most countries see in a year. He looked up, and his eyes were filled with something worse than anger. Disappointment. Says you never told any of us the truth about who you really are. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Minjun had faced hostile takeovers, board coups, corporate espionage that had nearly destroyed his family's empire. But nothing had prepared him for the quiet devastation in Marcus Washington's voice. How long have you known? Minjun asked finally. 3 weeks. Been researching you since Mom's heart attack just to make sure you weren't some kind of con artist taking advantage of my sister while she was emotional. Marcus closed the folder. Turns out you're exactly the opposite kind of liar. Marcus, I can explain. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been lying to us from day one. Not about being rich, about being honest. Marcus stood up, pacing to the window. You sat at our table, ate our food, asked for our blessing, and never once mentioned that you're probably one of the richest men to ever set foot in East Atlanta. Because it doesn't matter, Minjun shot back, his carefully controlled facade cracking. That money, that inheritance, that life, I gave it all up. It's not mine anymore. But it was. And you chose not to tell us. Marcus turned around, and Minjun saw hurt beneath the anger. Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out that the man my sister is about to marry has been keeping secrets this big? What am I supposed to think about what else you might be hiding? The words hit Minjun like physical blows. In Korea, privacy was protection. Personal information was shared carefully, strategically. But he was beginning to understand that in this family, love meant transparency. No walls, no secrets, no hidden parts of yourself. You want to know why I didn't tell you? Minjun said, his voice breaking. Because I was terrified you'd think I was slumming it, that this was all some rich boy's game, a way to rebel against Daddy before I eventually went crawling back to my real life. And instead we think you were ashamed of us, that we weren't good enough to know the truth about who you really are. The accusation landed like a punch to the gut. That's not... God, Marcus, that's not it at all. Then what is it? Minjun sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. It's that I've never been prouder of anything in my life than I am of the man I became when I chose your family over mine. And I was afraid that if you knew how much I'd given up, you'd think I was expecting some kind of gratitude, some kind of debt. He looked up at Marcus, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't want to be the billionaire who sacrificed everything for love. I want to be the man who was smart enough to choose the right family when it mattered. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the apartment complex where Minjun now lived. So different from the luxury he'd been born into. You know what really gets me? Marcus said finally. It's not that you had money. It's that you didn't trust us enough to tell us yourself. You're right, Minjun said simply. I should have told you. Yeah, you should have. Because now I've got to wonder what happens when things get tough. When the novelty of playing regular guy wears off, when you miss the private jets and the 5-star restaurants and the servants. Marcus's voice was raw. What happens when your family decides they want you back? Before Minjun could answer, the front door opened and Zara's laughter filled the apartment. She and Grace were carrying bags of fresh vegetables and flowers, chatting about centerpieces and color schemes. Baby, you'll never guess what Mrs. Patterson said about... Zara stopped mid-sentence when she saw Marcus's expression and the folder on the table. What's wrong? Marcus and Minjun looked at each other, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. However this conversation ended, Zara deserved to hear the truth from the man she was about to marry. Sit down, Minjun said gently. There's something I need to tell you. As he began to explain about the inheritance, about the fortune he'd walked away from, about the life of privilege he'd never mentioned, he watched Zara's face cycle through confusion, hurt, and something that might have been anger. $2 billion? She whispered when he finished. 2.3, Marcus corrected grimly. And you just gave it up? I renounced it, publicly, irrevocably. Minjun reached for her hands, but she pulled them back. Zara, I need you to understand. No, I need you to understand. Zara stood up, her voice shaking. I've been worried about affording flowers for our wedding. I've been saving money by making my own dress. I've been stressing about how we're going to pay for Mom's medical bills and whether we can afford to have kids someday. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. And this whole time, you could have written a check that would have solved every financial problem my family has ever had. But I don't have that money anymore, Minjun said desperately. I chose you over it. I chose love over money. You chose to keep secrets over honesty, Zara shot back. You chose to let me worry about things that don't matter to you because you've never had to worry about money. Grace, who had been silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke up. Zara, maybe we should talk about this when everyone's had time to... No. Zara's voice was final. I think Minjun should leave. Zara, please. I said leave. Minjun looked at Marcus, hoping for support. But Marcus just shook his head. You heard her, man. Maybe it's time you figured out how to win back her trust. As Minjun gathered his jacket and keys, his hands shaking, he realized that giving up a fortune had been the easy part. Learning to live with the consequences was going to be the real test. And waiting for him in the parking lot, leaning against a black Mercedes with diplomatic plates, was the one person he'd hoped never to see again. Hello, Minjun, Kim So-young said, her perfect English carrying just a hint of the accent that had once seemed charming. I think it's time we talked. Kim So-young looked exactly the same as she had 6 months ago. Immaculately dressed, perfectly composed, beautiful in the way that money and privilege could create. Standing next to the black Mercedes, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread about successful women who had everything they wanted. Everything except the man who'd left her at the altar. So young. Minjun's voice came out strangled. What are you doing here? Your father sent me. She smiled, but it was the polite, empty expression he remembered from their engagement photos. He thought you might be more reasonable if the message came from someone you cared about. I never cared about you, Minjun said, the words coming out harsher than he'd intended. Not the way you deserved, not the way I should have. No, you didn't. There was no hurt in her voice, just matter-of-fact acceptance. But I cared about you. Enough to come halfway around the world to save you from yourself. She gestured toward the apartment building where his life was currently falling apart. This is what you chose over everything we built together? Over everything our families planned? I chose love over duty. You chose infatuation over responsibility. So-young's voice remained calm, but steel crept into her tone. Do you have any idea what you did to me? To both our families? For the first time since she'd appeared, Minjun really looked at her. Beneath the perfect makeup, he could see exhaustion, stress lines that hadn't been there before, the faint tension around her eyes that spoke of months of public humiliation and private pain. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "You deserved better than what I did to you." "Yes, I did. But apologies don't fix broken contracts or restore family honor." She pulled an envelope from her designer handbag. "Your father is offering you one last chance to come home. The merger with Kim Electronics can still happen. The board is willing to reinstate you as heir. And all I have to do is marry you? All you have to do is come home and fulfill your obligations." So Young's expression softened slightly. "Minjun, I've seen the photos. I know about your American girlfriend. She's very beautiful. She's not my girlfriend. She's my fiancé. Your fiancé who just asked you to leave." The knife twisted in his chest. So Young had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to approach him. When he was vulnerable, hurt, questioning everything he'd sacrificed. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 3 weeks. Since your future mother-in-law's heart attack." So Young's voice carried a note of what might have been genuine sympathy. "I wanted to understand what kind of woman could make you throw away everything you are, everything you were raised to be. And what did you discover? That she's nothing like me." So Young leaned against the car, studying him. "She's passionate where I'm composed, emotional where I'm practical. She makes you feel things that you convinced yourself were love because you'd never felt them before. You don't know anything about what I feel for Zara. I know that real love doesn't ask someone to give up their identity." So Young's voice was gentle now, almost kind. "I know that if she truly loved you, she would have embraced all of who you are, including the parts that come with money and responsibility." She opened the envelope, revealing official-looking documents. The merger documents. Already signed by both families. All that's missing is your signature. "I'm not signing anything. Look around you, Minjun." So Young gestured to the modest apartment building, to the neighborhood that was nice but decidedly middle class. "Is this really the life you want? Working construction, worrying about medical bills, fighting about money?" "Yes," Minjun said without hesitation. "Even if she can't forgive you for lying to her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Through the window of his apartment, Minjun could see Marcus and Zara talking, their body language tense and unhappy. Grace was making tea, the universal gesture of crisis management. "She'll forgive me," Minjun said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Will she? Because from what I observed, American women value honesty above everything else, and you've been lying to her since the day you met." "I never lied about loving her." "No, but you lied about everything else. About who you are, where you come from, what you gave up." So Young's voice was sympathetic now, almost gentle. "How can she trust anything you say when you've been hiding the most fundamental truth about yourself?" Minjun felt something cold and heavy settling in his stomach. Because So Young was right. He had been lying, not by commission, but by omission. Every day he'd let Zara worry about money. Every time he'd watched her stress about wedding costs or her mother's medical bills, he'd been lying. "Come home with me," So Young said softly. "Marry me. Take your place at the company. Fulfill your obligations. I won't ask you to love me the way you love her, but I'll give you the life you were born to live." And what kind of marriage would that be? An honest one. Based on mutual respect and shared understanding, rather than impossible promises and unrealistic expectations. She smiled sadly. I know who you are, Minjun. All of who you are. And I'll never ask you to be someone else. Before Minjun could respond, footsteps on the stairs made them both turn. Zara was coming down, her face streaked with tears, Grace beside her with a protective expression that could have melted steel. The two women sized each other up in the way that only women could, instantly, completely, and with devastating accuracy. You must be Zara, So Young said, her English flawless and her manner impeccably polite. I'm Kim So Young, Minjun's former fiancé. Former, Zara repeated, and there was ice in her voice. Yes, well, these things can change so quickly, can't they? So Young's smile was perfectly pleasant and completely predatory, especially when people discover they don't really know each other at all. Grace stepped slightly in front of Zara, lawyer instincts kicking in. I think this conversation is over. Actually, I think it's just beginning, So Young replied. She looked directly at Zara, her expression sympathetic, but firm. He never told you about the money, did he? About what kind of life he was really born to? That's enough, Minjun said, moving between them. Is it? So Young tilted her head. Because I think Zara deserves to know exactly what kind of man she's marrying. Someone who will keep life-changing secrets. Someone who will let the people he claims to love struggle and worry, rather than tell them the truth. Get away from here, Zara said, her voice shaking with fury. Right now. Of course. So Young smiled and got into her car. But Minjun, when you're ready to stop playing house and come back to the real world, you know where to find me. As the Mercedes pulled away, Zara turned to Minjun with eyes that were bright with tears and dark with betrayal. Is everything she said true? Zara. Is it true? Yes, Minjun whispered. But it doesn't change anything between us. It changes everything, Zara said. Because now I know that the man I fell in love with doesn't really exist. And as she walked away from him for the second time in one day, Minjun realized that losing a fortune had been nothing compared to losing the woman who'd taught him what it meant to be truly wealthy. But the game was far from over, and Kim So Young had only shown the first of her cards. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Minjun's phone rang at 6 a.m., jarring him from the restless sleep he'd finally found on Grace's couch. She'd reluctantly let him stay after Zara made it clear he wasn't welcome at their apartment. Minjun. His father's voice was exactly the same as it had been 6 months ago. Cold, controlled, and utterly without affection. I trust So Young delivered my message. Appa. The word felt foreign on his tongue now, like speaking a language he'd once known fluently but had forgotten through disuse. I'm calling to inform you that your mother is in the hospital. Stress-induced cardiac episode. The doctors say she may not recover. The world tilted. Minjun gripped the phone harder. What? The shame you brought on this family has been slowly killing her for months. The constant media attention, the questions about where we went wrong as parents, the business ramifications of your selfish choice. His father's voice never wavered. She collapsed yesterday during a board meeting. The stress finally overwhelmed her. I'm coming home. No. The word was final. You made your choice. You are no longer my son, and she is no longer your mother. You can't do this. I can and I have. However, if you choose to honor your obligations to this family, if you marry So Young and take your rightful place as heir to Park Industries, we will welcome you back. Your mother will have the surgery she needs, and we can begin to repair the damage you've done." The phone went dead. Minjun stared at the black screen, his hands shaking. Grace found him there an hour later, still holding the phone, tears streaming down his face. "Minjun, what's wrong?" He told her everything: his father's call, his mother's condition, the ultimatum that would tear his heart in two no matter which way he chose. "Jesus," Grace breathed. "That's emotional blackmail at its finest." "She's dying, Grace. My mother is dying because of what I did." "Your mother is sick because your father is a manipulative bastard who's willing to use her health as a weapon." Grace's voice was fierce. "Don't you see what he's doing? He knows you love Zara, so he's making you choose between the woman you love and the woman who gave you life. But if I don't go back, if I don't marry so young, your mother might die anyway. These kinds of men don't keep their promises, Minjun. Even if you go back, even if you do everything he wants, what guarantee do you have that he'll actually get her the help she needs?" Minjun knew she was right, but knowing it didn't make the choice any easier. "I have to at least try," he said. "I can't live with myself if I don't try to save her." "And what about Zara? What about the family you've built here? Zara doesn't want me anymore. She made that clear yesterday. Zara is hurt and angry, but she loves you. Give her time to process everything, to understand why you made the choices you made." Grace sat beside him on the couch. "Don't throw away the best thing that ever happened to you because your father is playing mind games." But even as Grace spoke, Minjun's phone buzzed with a text from So Young. "Flight leaves at 8 p.m. I've taken the liberty of booking your seat. Your mother is asking for you." A photo followed. His mother in a hospital bed, looking impossibly frail and small. She'd aged years in the months since he'd seen her, and the sight of her like that broke something fundamental in his chest. "I have to go," he whispered. "Minjun, I have to try to save her, even if it means losing everything else." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you want me to tell Zara?" "Tell her," Minjun's voice cracked. "Tell her that I love her enough to let her go. That she deserves someone who can give her the honesty and simplicity she needs. Someone who doesn't come with impossible choices and family trauma." That's bullshit, and you know it. Maybe, but it's also true. 3 hours later, Minjun stood in the apartment he'd shared with Zara, packing the few belongings he'd brought from Korea. The red umbrella leaned against the wall where he'd left it, and seeing it there made his chest tighten with loss. He'd just finished folding the last of his shirts when the door opened. Zara stood in the doorway, her eyes red from crying, wearing the terracotta dress he'd fallen in love with the first time he saw her. "Grace told me," she said simply. "I'm sorry. For everything. For lying to you. For not trusting you with the truth. For letting you worry about things that didn't matter." Minjun closed the suitcase with shaking hands. "You deserve better than what I've given you." "Do I get a say in what I deserve?" "Zara. Because I think I deserve a man who fights for the woman he loves. Who doesn't run back to his family the minute things get difficult. My mother is dying. Your father is manipulating you. And you're letting him." Zara stepped into the room, her voice gaining strength. "You want to know what I realized after you left yesterday? It wasn't the money that hurt me. It was the fact that you didn't trust me enough to tell me who you really are. I do trust you. No, you don't. You see me as someone who needs to be protected from difficult truths instead of someone strong enough to handle them." Zara's eyes flashed. You think I can't love all of you. The complicated parts, the messy parts, the parts that come with impossible families and billion-dollar responsibilities. Can you? The question escaped before Minjun could stop it. I don't know. Because you've never given me the chance to try. Zara moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. But I'm willing to find out if you are. For a moment, Minjun allowed himself to hope. To imagine a world where love really could conquer family duty. Where he could choose Zara and somehow still save his mother. But then his phone rang. So Young's voice was gentle but firm. The car is here. We need to leave for the airport. I have to go, Minjun said, the words tearing his throat raw. No, you don't. You're choosing to go. Zara's voice was steady now, final. And if you get on that plane, if you marry her, don't come back, because I won't be here waiting for you. Zara. I mean it, Minjun. I won't be someone's backup plan. I won't be the woman you settle for when duty doesn't work out. She pulled her grandmother's ring off her finger and set it on the dresser. The small diamond caught the afternoon light, and Minjun realized he was looking at the death of every dream he'd built since coming to Atlanta. Choose, Zara said simply. But choose knowing that this time it's final. Minjun looked at the ring, then at the woman he loved more than life itself, then at the suitcase that represented surrender to a life he'd thought he'd escaped. And for the first time in 32 years, Park Minjun made a choice that was entirely, completely his own. Minjun's hand closed around the ring on the dresser. The small diamond was warm from the afternoon sun streaming through the window, and holding it felt like holding everything he'd ever wanted in one tiny, perfect circle. I choose you, he said, his voice breaking. I choose us. Zara's eyes filled with tears. What about your mother? I'll find another way to help her. I'll call every doctor in Korea. I'll hire the best medical team money can... Wait. Minjun stopped, realization dawning. Money I don't have anymore. But I do. Both Minjun and Zara turned to see Grace standing in the doorway, her phone in her hand, and an expression of grim satisfaction on her face. I've been making some calls, Grace said. Turns out, having a law degree and a naturally suspicious mind comes in handy sometimes. She walked into the room, her phone screen showing what looked like medical records. Your mother's condition isn't nearly as serious as your father led you to believe. Mild cardiac episode, fully treatable with medication and lifestyle changes. She was released from the hospital this morning. Minjun's legs gave out. He sank onto the bed, staring at Grace. What? I called 3 hospitals in Seoul, claimed to be coordinating international insurance, and finally found her. Park Yoon-hee, admitted yesterday for chest pains, discharged this morning in stable condition. Grace's voice was steel. Your father lied to you. But the photo So Young sent could have been taken anywhere, anytime. Could have been staged. Grace sat down across from him. Minjun, your father is a businessman. He knows your weaknesses, and he's exploiting them. Zara moved to sit beside Minjun on the bed, her hand finding his. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Minjun could answer, his phone rang. So Young's name flashed on the screen. She's waiting, Zara said quietly. Let her wait. Minjun declined the call and immediately dialed another number. When his mother's voice answered, speaking Korean from what sounded like her own bedroom, he nearly collapsed with relief. Yama, he whispered. Are you all right? Minjun? His mother's voice was warm, confused. Why are you calling? Didn't your father tell you I was fine? He told me you were dying." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Min-jun thought they'd been disconnected. When his mother finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "Oh, my son, what has he done?" "Yama, I need you to listen to me. I love you. I will always love you. But I can't come home. Not to a life that was never really mine." "I know," she whispered. "I've known since the day you called off the wedding. You looked more alive in those 5 minutes than you had in 30 years of being the perfect son. You're not angry. I'm heartbroken that your father has let his pride matter more than his son's happiness. But angry? No, baby. I'm proud of you." When Min-jun hung up, tears streaming down his face, Zara was holding the ring up between them. "So," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "are you going to put this back where it belongs? Or am I going to have to propose to you myself?" "Zara Washington," Min-jun said, taking the ring and sliding it back onto her finger where it caught the light like a promise. "Will you marry me? Not the heir to Park Industries, not the reformed billionaire, just me, Min-jun, the man who loves you enough to choose you every day for the rest of his life." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of a car horn blaring outside. Through the window, they could see So-young standing beside the black Mercedes, checking her watch with growing impatience. "I should go talk to her," Min-jun said. "We should go talk to her," Zara corrected. "Whatever this is, we're facing it together." They found So-young pacing beside the car, her perfect composure finally starting to crack. "The plane leaves in 2 hours, she said without preamble. "We need to—" She stopped when she saw Zara's hand in Min-jun's, the ring back where it belonged. "I see. So, Young, I'm sorry, but I can't marry you. I can't go back to a life that was killing me slowly every day. And your family? Your responsibilities? My responsibility is to be happy, to build a life with someone I love, who loves me back exactly as I am." Min-jun's voice was steady, certain. "My family will have to learn to live with that." So-young studied him for a long moment, her perfect mask finally slipping to reveal something that looked almost like relief. "You know what's funny?" she said softly. "I came here prepared to fight for you, to convince you that duty mattered more than love, that we could build something meaningful together based on respect and shared obligation. And now I'm looking at a man I barely recognize, someone who's learned to put his own happiness first." She smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, it was genuine. "I never could have given you that." Zara stepped forward, surprising everyone by extending her hand. "I'm sorry for what he put you through. The public humiliation, the broken promises. You deserved better than that." "So," Young took her hand, studying Zara's face with something like wonder. "You really love him, don't you? All of him. Even the parts that come with impossible families and billion-dollar complications." "Especially those parts," Zara said firmly. "They're what make him who he is." "Then you're braver than I am." So-young released her hand and turned back to Min-jun. "Your father won't give up easily. He'll find other ways to pressure you. Let him try. And the inheritance? The company? Everything you were raised to take over?" Min-jun looked at Zara, at the woman who had taught him that love wasn't something you earned through perfection, but something you built through honest, daily choices. "I renounced all of that when I chose her. Some decisions can't be undone." So, Young nodded slowly, then got into her car. But before driving away, she rolled down the window one last time. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you chose right." As the Mercedes disappeared around the corner, Min-jun felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Complete certainty. Not about what the future would bring, but about who he wanted to face it with. "So," Zara said, linking her arm through his. "Ready to go tell my family that the wedding's back on?" "Actually," Min-jun said, "I think there's something else we need to do first." The next morning, Min-jun stood in Mrs. Washington's kitchen at 5 a.m., flour in his hair and panic in his eyes. He'd been trying to make biscuits from scratch for 2 hours, and the results looked like edible disasters. "Baby, what are you doing?" Zara appeared in the doorway, wearing one of his old t-shirts and looking adorably rumpled from sleep. "I wanted to make breakfast for your family, to apologize properly, to show them that I'm serious about being part of this family." Min-jun gestured helplessly at the counter, which looked like a flour bomb had exploded. "But I think I'm making it worse." Zara burst into laughter, the sound filling the kitchen like music. "You've been up all night trying to make biscuits?" "Your grandmother's recipe. I found it in the box your mother keeps by the stove." Min-jun held up a flour-covered index card. "But apparently there's a difference between knowing the ingredients and actually being able to bake them. Come here." Zara moved behind him, her arms circling his waist as she guided his hands through the proper technique for kneading dough. "You were overworking it. Biscuits need a gentle touch." "Like love," Min-jun said softly. "Exactly like love." They worked together in the pre-dawn quiet, and Min-jun realized this was what he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing it. Not the grand gestures or the expensive displays of affection he'd grown up thinking were love, but this quiet intimacy, the simple act of creating something together with their hands. "Min-jun," Zara said, as they waited for the biscuits to bake, "I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him turn to face her fully. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge to a future he'd barely dared to imagine. Min-jun's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. "I found out 3 days ago, before all the drama with So Young and your father." Zara's voice was steady, but he could see the nervousness in her eyes. "I was going to tell you, but then everything exploded, and I didn't know if you were staying or going, and..." Min-jun silenced her with a kiss that tasted like forever. "A baby," he whispered against her lips. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Min-jun dropped to his knees, pressing his face against Zara's still flat stomach. "Hello, little one. I'm your daddy, and I promise you right now that I will never let anyone or anything make you feel like you have to choose between love and duty. You get to have both." The oven timer chose that moment to announce that the biscuits were ready, and as they pulled out perfectly golden, fluffy miracles, Min-jun realized that happiness really was this simple. Flour on your hands, the woman you love beside you, and the promise of a future you're building together one choice at a time. "Smells like heaven in here." They turned to find Marcus standing in the doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. Behind him, Mrs. Washington appeared in her robe and slippers, drawn by the smell of fresh baking. "Min-jun?" Mrs. Washington looked around her kitchen in amazement. "Did you make breakfast?" "I tried to make your mother's biscuits," Min-jun said, suddenly self-conscious. "I wanted to apologize for lying to you, for not trusting you with the truth about who I am and where I come from." Marcus and Mrs. Washington exchanged a look that held an entire conversation. "Son," Mrs. Washington said finally. "Come sit down." They gathered around the kitchen table that had been the heart of the Washington home for 20 years. Min-jun served the biscuits with hands that shook slightly, waiting for judgment, for forgiveness, for whatever came next. Mrs. Washington took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then smiled the kind of smile that could heal broken hearts. "These are perfect," she said. "Just like Mama used to make." "Mrs. Washington." "Dorothy. If you're going to be my son-in-law, you call me Dorothy." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Now, I want you to listen to me carefully. I don't care if you used to be rich. I don't care if your daddy owns half of Korea. I don't even care that you kept secrets, because everybody has secrets. What do you care about?" Min-jun asked. "I care that you love my daughter enough to give up everything you knew to build a life with her. I care that you stood by this family during the hardest week of my life, sleeping in hospital chairs and bringing Marcus coffee at 3 a.m. Dorothy's eyes were bright with tears. "I care that you looked me in the eye and asked for my blessing like it was the most important thing in the world." "It was the most important thing in the world." "Then that's all that matters." Marcus had been quietly eating his biscuit, but now he looked up. "There's something else you should know." Min-jun's stomach dropped. "What?" "Grace did some more digging after So Young left. Your father's been having you followed for months." "The reporters who showed up at Mom's hospital? He sent them." "What?" Zara's voice was sharp with anger. "He's been orchestrating a campaign to make your life here as difficult as possible, hoping you'd get frustrated and come home." Marcus's jaw was tight. "The man's been playing chess while you've been trying to live your life." Min-jun felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had driven him to renounce his inheritance in the first place. "He can try whatever he wants," Min-jun said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good," Dorothy said firmly, "because I just got used to the idea of having a son who can actually cook." As they laughed together around the table, sharing biscuits and coffee and the kind of unconditional acceptance Min-jun had never known existed, he realized that his father could send all the reporters and private investigators he wanted. This family was worth fighting for, and he was finally ready for war. 3 weeks later, Min-jun stood in the parking lot of Home Depot, staring at the receipt in his hand that showed the purchase of enough lumber to build a small house, which, as it turned out, was exactly what they were doing. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked, loading 2x4s into the back of his truck. "Building your own house is no joke." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Min-jun replied, and meant it. The lot they'd bought was small, just half an acre on the outskirts of Decatur. But it was theirs. Every square foot paid for with money Min-jun had earned working construction, money that carried the weight of honest labor instead of inherited privilege. "Besides," he added, grinning at his future brother-in-law, "I've got the best teacher in Atlanta." "Flattery will get you everywhere," Marcus said, but he was smiling too. The house they were planning was modest. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a kitchen big enough for family gatherings, but not so big that it felt empty when it was just the 3 of them. Because now it would be 3 of them, Zara's pregnancy just beginning to show in the soft curve of her belly. "Have you thought about names yet?" Grace asked as she helped Zara sort through paint samples that afternoon. They were sitting on what would eventually be the front porch, but for now was just a concrete pad surrounded by the framing of their future home. "If it's a girl, Dorothy Grace," Zara said without hesitation. "After the 2 women who taught me what strength looks like." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Really? And if it's a boy, Zara looked at Minjun, who was measuring twice and cutting once under Marcus's watchful supervision. I was thinking David, after the king who faced giants. Your giant fighting days are behind you, Grace said gently. Are they? Zara touched her stomach. Because I have a feeling raising a half-Korean, half-African-American baby in the South is going to require some giant facing of its own. It was true. Already they'd encountered stares in restaurants, whispered comments in grocery stores, the kind of casual prejudice that came from people who'd never seen love that crossed cultural lines. But they'd also found unexpected allies. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who'd brought them homemade soup when Zara had morning sickness. The guys from Minjun's construction crew, who'd shown up on Saturday to help frame the house without being asked. Pastor Williams, who'd offered to perform their wedding ceremony despite the raised eyebrows from some of the older congregation members. You know what I realized? Minjun said that evening as they sat on upturned buckets in what would eventually be their living room, sharing Chinese takeout and watching the sunset through the window frames. What's that? In Korea, we have this concept called jong. It doesn't translate perfectly, but it's like the feeling of deep affection that develops between people over time. Not the passionate love of romance, but the steady, dependable love of family. Zara leaned against his shoulder. And I used to think I understood what it meant, but I was wrong. Minjun gestured around their half-built home. This is Jung. Your brother teaching me how to use a nail gun. Your mother sharing her recipes with me. Grace becoming the sister I never had. It's not something you're born into. It's something you build, one choice at a time. Speaking of choices, Zara said, pulling an envelope from her purse. This came for you today. Minjun recognized his father's handwriting immediately. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a contract releasing him from all obligations to Park Industries, along with a formal disowning document that stripped him of the Park name and any claim to the family fortune. He really did it, Minjun whispered. Are you okay? I'm free. The realization hit him like a physical weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in my life, I'm completely free. Zara took the papers and without ceremony tore them in half. What are you doing? You don't need his permission to be free. You never did. She tossed the pieces into the air, letting them flutter down like confetti. Besides, you'll always be a Park to me. Park Minjun, the man who chose love over everything else. That night, they made love in their unfinished bedroom on an air mattress, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of new wood. And Minjun realized that this honest, unglamorous, imperfect life was worth more than all the wealth he'd been born into. But their peace wasn't destined to last. Because 3 time zones away in Seoul, Park Chairman was making phone calls that would test every ounce of Jung Minjun had built in America. The war for his son's soul wasn't over. It was just beginning. The wedding was supposed to be simple. 50 people in Mrs. Washington's backyard, folding chairs borrowed from the church, Zara's dress made by a local seamstress who specialized in elegant but affordable. Minjun had insisted on paying for everything with money from his construction job, money that meant something because he'd earned it with his own hands. 2 days before the ceremony, he was installing the last of the kitchen cabinets in their new house, when Marcus appeared in the doorway with an expression that could have stopped traffic. We have a problem, Marcus said. What kind of problem? The kind that involves 3 black SUVs with diplomatic plates parked outside Mom's house and your entire family sitting in her living room drinking tea like they're conducting a hostile takeover. Min-jun nearly dropped his drill. What? Your parents, your sister, some guy in a suit who introduced himself as your family's lawyer, and so young. They showed up an hour ago with enough luggage for a month-long stay and a translator who keeps bowing to everyone. Min-jun sank onto the sawhorses they were using as makeshift seats. How did they even know about the wedding? Apparently, your father has had private investigators watching you for months. They know everything. Where you work, what you eat for breakfast, probably your shoe size. Marcus's voice was grim. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The drive to Mrs. Washington's house felt like traveling to his own execution. Min-jun's hands shook on the steering wheel as he tried to prepare for the confrontation he'd been dreading for 8 months. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight of his father, Park Chairman, one of the most powerful men in Korea, sitting in Dorothy Washington's floral print armchair, accepting sweet tea from the woman he'd probably consider far beneath his station. Min-jun. His father stood as he entered the living room, and for a moment, Min-jun was 12 years old again, trembling under the weight of expectations he could never meet. Appa. The word came out strangled. His mother rushed forward, and Min-jun found himself enveloped in the embrace he'd been missing for 8 months. She'd lost weight, and there were new lines around her eyes, but she was alive and healthy and holding him like she'd never let go. "My son," she whispered in Korean. "Look how strong you've become." Behind her, his sister Minseo waited with the patience she'd learned growing up as the spare heir. At 28, she'd always lived in Min-jun's shadow, but now she looked at him with something that might have been admiration. "Appa," she said quietly, "you look happy." "I am." "Good. You never were before." The reunion was interrupted by Zara's arrival home from her doctor's appointment, Grace beside her for moral support. Min-jun watched his two worlds collide in Dorothy Washington's living room. His Korean family, formal and reserved even in this moment of reconciliation, and his American family, warm and protective and ready for battle. "So," his father said, switching to English out of respect for their hosts, "this is the woman who stole my son." "With all due respect, sir," Zara replied, her voice steady as steel. "I didn't steal anything. He chose me." "And what did he choose? A life of poverty, manual labor, living in a house smaller than our servants' quarters." "He chose love," Dorothy Washington said, entering the conversation with the authority of someone who'd raised 2 children and buried 1 husband, and knew the value of what really mattered. "Something money can't buy." "Mrs. Washington," Min-jun's father said, inclining his head slightly, "I understand you believe you know what's best for my son, but you don't understand the responsibilities he was born to carry. I understand that responsibilities without joy are just chains wearing fancy names." Min-jun watched the 2 powerful personalities face off across the coffee table. These 2 people who'd shaped the adults their children had become through completely different philosophies of love. "I came here," his father continued, "to offer a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" Min-jun asked, though his heart was already sinking. "Marry her if you must, but come home. Bring her to Korea. I'll give her a place in the company, a position worthy of her talents. Your children will be raised as Parks, with all the advantages that name provides." The offer hung in the air like a poisonous flower, beautiful on the surface, deadly at its core. "And if we refuse?" Zara asked. "Then you raise your children in exile, cut off from half their heritage, never knowing the power and influence they were born to inherit. Minjun felt the old familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the crushing pressure of family expectations, the guilt of disappointing people who'd sacrificed for him, the fear of making the wrong choice for his unborn child. But then Zara's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his in a grip that said, "We're in this together." And he remembered who he was now. Not the dutiful son or the rebellious heir, but the man who'd learned that the only inheritance that mattered was the one you built with your own hands. "No," he said simply. "Minjun, no, Appa. I won't trade my freedom for your approval again. I won't ask the woman I love to live in a world that will never fully accept her. And I won't raise my children to believe that duty matters more than happiness." His father's face went through several emotions: surprise, anger, and finally something that might have been respect. "You've changed," he said. "I've grown up. And if I disown you completely, if I ensure that the park name has no power to protect you or your family..." Minjun looked around the room, at Marcus, ready to defend his sister with his life, at Dorothy, who'd opened her home to strangers because they were family to someone she loved, at Grace, who'd spent weeks researching Korean family law just to help him understand his options, at Zara, carrying their child and facing his family's disapproval with quiet dignity. "Then I'll build my own name, one that means something because of the love behind it, not the money." The silence stretched until Minjun's mother stood up, walked to her son, and cupped his face in her hands. "I'm proud of you," she said in English, so everyone could understand. "Finally, I'm proud of the man you've become." She turned to face her husband, and when she spoke, her voice carried 30 years of being the perfect corporate wife. "If you can't accept our son's choice, then you'll lose us both. Because I won't watch you destroy the first happiness he's ever found." The ultimatum landed like a bomb in the quiet living room. Minjun's father stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Yoon-hee, I lost my first love to family pressure 40 years ago. I married you because it was expected, and I learned to love you because you were a good man underneath all the corporate armor." Her voice was gentle but implacable. "But I won't let you make our son repeat my mistakes." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying choose wisely. Because this is your last chance to have a relationship with your son and your future grandchild." The room held its breath. And then, to everyone's shock, Park Chairman began to laugh. 40 years of marriage, and you choose now to grow a backbone? Better late than never. He studied his son for a long moment, taking in the calloused hands, the simple clothes, the obvious contentment that had never been there during his years as heir to the park fortune. "The wedding is tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Dorothy answered. "Then I suppose we'd better stay and meet our new daughter-in-law properly." And as the tension in the room finally broke, as Korean and English mixed in excited conversations about wedding preparations and baby names, and the future they were all going to build together, Minjun realized that sometimes miracles came disguised as the ordinary courage to choose love over fear. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. The wedding day dawned perfect. Clear skies, soft breeze, and the kind of golden autumn light that made everything look like it had been painted by angels. Minjun stood in Marcus's bedroom, fumbling with his tie for the 100th time while his father watched with amused patience. "You're more nervous now than you were before board meetings with hostile investors," his father observed. "Those were just money. This is my entire life." "Ah." Park Chairman moved to help with the tie, his hands steady and sure. "Now I understand why you chose her. Do you? She's not marrying Park Industries. She's not marrying a fortune or a name or a strategic advantage. She's marrying Park Min-jun, the man. His father's voice was quiet, almost wondering. I don't think anyone has ever seen you that clearly before. Not even you? Especially not me. I spent so many years trying to make you into the heir I needed that I forgot to see the son I had. He finished adjusting the tie and stepped back. I'm sorry for that. The apology hung between them like a bridge across 32 years of misunderstanding. Appa. No, let me finish. Your mother was right. I let my pride and my fear of losing control blind me to what was really important. He placed his hands on Min-jun's shoulders. You gave up everything to choose love. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you the bravest man I know. Before Min-jun could respond, Marcus burst through the door. Time to go, man. Your bride is ready. And if you keep her waiting much longer, Grace is going to come find you herself. The backyard had been transformed into something magical. White chairs arranged in neat rows, an arch made of magnolia branches and roses, fairy lights strung through the trees even though it was still daylight. 50 people who had become family through choice rather than blood, all gathered to witness the beginning of something beautiful. But when the music started and Zara appeared at the back door of her mother's house, everything else disappeared. She wore a simple white dress with lace sleeves, her natural curls crowned with a circlet of baby's breath, her grandmother's pearls at her throat. But what took Min-jun's breath away was her smile, radiant, joyful, and directed entirely at him. Dorothy walked her daughter down the makeshift aisle, and when she placed Zara's hand in Min-jun's, she whispered, "Take care of my baby." "With my life," Min-jun promised. Pastor Williams opened the ceremony with words about love that crosses all boundaries, about families that are built by choice, about the courage it takes to commit your life to another person. But Min-jun barely heard him, lost in Zara's eyes and the reality that this was actually happening. Do you, Park Min-jun, take Zara to be your wife? To honor her, cherish her, support her dreams, and build a life together based on honesty, respect, and love? I do, Min-jun said, his voice carrying to the back row where his Korean family sat next to construction workers and church ladies and lawyers in perfect, improbable harmony. Do you, Zara Washington, take Min-jun to be your husband? To stand beside him, challenge him to be his best self, and create a family that honors both your cultures and builds something entirely new? I do, Zara said, tears streaming down her face. The rings they exchanged were simple gold bands, chosen together and paid for with construction wages. But when Min-jun slipped the band onto Zara's finger, right next to her grandmother's engagement ring, it felt like the most precious thing he'd ever held. By the power vested in me by God and the state of Georgia, Pastor Williams said with a grin, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Min-jun, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was soft, sweet, and full of promises for the future they would build together. When they broke apart, the backyard erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to shake the very trees. But as they turned to face their guests, Min-jun's eyes found his sister in the crowd. Min-seo was crying, her usual composure completely shattered, and when their eyes met, she mouthed words in Korean that made his heart swell. I'm proud of you, Appa. The reception was everything Min-jun had never known he wanted, Mrs. Washington's famous fried chicken served alongside bulgogi that Min-seo had somehow convinced a Korean restaurant in downtown Atlanta to cater. Korean folk songs mixed with gospel hymns and Motown classics, children running around the backyard while adults shared stories in 2 languages, and found that laughter translated perfectly. "So what now?" Grace asked, as she and Minjun watched Zara teach his mother how to dance to Aretha Franklin. "Now we finish building our house, have our baby, figure out how to raise a child who's going to be Korean and African-American and Southern, and probably stubborn as hell." Sounds terrifying. Sounds perfect. As the evening wound down, and guests began to leave with containers of leftovers and hearts full of joy, Minjun found himself standing on the back porch with his father, both of them watching Zara and his mother attempt to communicate in a mixture of broken English, basic Korean, and elaborate gestures. "She's going to be good for our family," his father said quietly. "She already is. The offer still stands, you know. If you ever want to come home, I am home, Appa." Minjun's voice was gentle but firm. "This is where I belong." His father nodded slowly. "Then we'll come to you. Your mother is already planning her first visit for when the baby is born. And the company? Min Seo has been handling more responsibilities while you've been gone. She's ready to be the heir Park Industries needs." He smiled. "I think she always was. I was just too traditional to see it." As the last guests departed and the cleanup began, Minjun found himself alone with Zara for the first time as her husband. They sat on the porch swing Dorothy had given them as a wedding gift, Zara's head on his shoulder, her hand resting on the small bump where their child grew. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. "Only one." "What's that?" "I wish I could go back and tell that scared, lonely man in the Seoul boardroom that happiness was worth more than all the money in the world. It might have saved us both some heartache. Maybe. Or maybe we needed all those struggles to appreciate what we have now." Minjun thought about the red umbrella that now hung by their front door, no longer a shield against the world, but a reminder of the journey that had brought them together. About the construction calluses on his hands that told the story of building something real with his own labor. About the family photos that now filled their mantelpiece, Korean and American faces mixed together in the beautiful chaos of chosen love. "I love you, Mrs. Park," he said, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "I love you too, Mr. Park." Zara lifted her head to look at him. "Ready for the adventure? With you? Bring it on." And as they sat together in the Georgia twilight, surrounded by the laughter of their blended families and the promise of the life they would build together, Minjun realized that some fairy tales don't end with happily ever after. They begin with it. 6 months later, Minjun held his daughter for the first time in the hospital room, where 2 families became one. Dorothy Grace Park had her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and when she wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb, Minjun understood what his own father had been trying to tell him all those years. Love wasn't just a feeling. It was a responsibility, a commitment, a daily choice to put someone else's happiness before your own pride. But unlike his father, Minjun had learned that the two didn't have to be mutually exclusive. You could honor your family and follow your heart. You could respect tradition and build something new. You could be Korean and American and Southern and global all at once. And you could love someone so completely that giving up everything else didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like coming home. As Zara slept and baby Dorothy gurgled contentedly in his arms, Minjun made the same promise he'd made a year ago in a hospital waiting room, when he'd first understood what family really meant. To protect this love with his life, to build something worthy of the sacrifices they'd made, and to never let his daughter question whether she was enough exactly as she was. Some contracts, he'd learned, were written not in ink, but in the daily choice to choose love over fear, hope over obligation, and the family you build over the family you're born into. And this contract, marriage, fatherhood, the beautiful chaos of building a life from scratch, was one he'd happily spend forever honoring. The end. Have you ever experienced a love that made you completely change your life? Share in the comments what the biggest sacrifice you would make for true love is,